It is the greatest country we've ever seen. I think about one of the great elements is that it's always been about the future. When you think of America, you think about people looking to the next horizon, sacrificing, taking risks in the hopes that the life for their children and grandchildren would be better. I know my parents never had a chance to go to college, but they sacrificed everything so my brother and I could get the best opportunity to lead a better life imaginable. You are taking out loans that you'll have to repay, sacrificing today because you believe in tomorrow. That has always been the nature of America. It's about the future. It's about the next generation. Never before have we seen under this president and in Washington people who are limiting our future so they can live beyond their means today, and it has got to stop. You know, people say, well, there's no solutions out there. Well, there are plenty of solutions out there. President Obama himself appointed a deficit reduction commission. The Bowles-Simpson Commission, bipartisan, people from both parties, they came together, they met. And in something that people didn't think could happen, they came up with a bipartisan plan to reduce the federal deficit by $4 trillion over the next decade. What did the president do? He ignored the recommendations of his own bipartisan commission. Last year, President Obama stood up and said, yeah, the deficit's very, very significant. We have to have real solutions. And if someone puts out a solution, the one thing we can't do is demonize them or criticize them because we might disagree with a part of their proposed solution. What happens? Paul Ryan and the House Republicans put out a solution that would cut over $6 trillion from the federal deficit over the next decade. And this president, within a matter of days, demonizes it in rhetoric not worthy of a grade B politician, let alone the President of the United States. The man who said last year, this is a serious issue, we can't demonize solutions because we disagree, turns around a year later and for his political benefit demonizes a solution because he doesn't want the politics of it. And it's not just their solution. Senator Toomey has put out a more than $7 trillion their solution. There are others who have proposed bipartisan methods to deal with this. And what we get from Washington is demonization and an ignoring of this critical issue. We can't allow it to continue. We have to stop this. And as Eric said in his introduction, this is not something to me that's just abstract. Because when I became governor of the state of New York the first time, I inherited a $5 billion deficit. And in the context of the budget at the time, it was huge. And I had run on a campaign saying I was going to reduce taxes in New York so that we could become competitive and start creating the private sector jobs you need to grow, to sustain the economy. So after the word came out that, wow, you have a $5 billion deficit, you can't cut taxes. Well, not only did we close that deficit that first year by reducing spending, not the growth in spending. We spent less that year than the year before in absolute dollars. And the year after that, we spent less than the year before that, continuing to reduce the size and the cost of government. And at the same time, we cut taxes. We cut taxes over the 12 years I was governor by a total of $143 billion, more than the rest of the country combined. And what happened? When I left, despite the dot-com bubble of 2000 and 2001, and despite the horrific economic aftermath in New York of the attacks of September 11th, we had more than a $2 billion surplus and the highest credit rating in the history of our state. Now, how did you do it? How did we do it? We looked at the size of the state workforce and said, we can't sustain this. By the time I left office, we had reduced the size of the state workforce by over 15%. There's no reason you couldn't do the same thing with the federal workforce and save trillions of dollars. And by the way, at the end, government functioned better because you didn't have bureaucrats tripping over each other. They were more efficient. And then people were happy with that reduced workforce. We looked at entitlements like welfare and Medicaid and put in place real changes, reducing the costs and reducing the growth in those. And by doing this, we were able to not just shrink the size and the cost of government, we grew the private sector. And we had almost 700,000 more private sector jobs when I left office than we did when I took office. There's no reason they can't do the same thing in Washington. Well, there is one reason. Politics. And the lack of political will. And it's not just this president. By the way, I was very, very upset when some of the Republican candidates like Newt Gingrich came out and criticized the Ryan plan. You know, you don't have to agree with all the elements, but you have to give people credit for putting forth a credible solution. And then Governor Romney came out and said, apparently, that he didn't think we could deal with entitlements because they were too politically sensitive. Well, you're not going to balance the budget without dealing with entitlements. I did it in New York. They can do it in Washington. And unless we do it, your debt is not just going to be a college debt. It's going to be something that you and your grandchildren cannot afford to pay for. You know, the IMF, a terrible organization, but they have global predicting capability, said about a month ago, China's going to pass the United States in 5 years. I don't want to see China pass the United States in 55 years. Standard & Poor's came out, US dollar, the currency of the globe, and gave it a negative credit watch for the first time in history. If people think this is just something, they're numbers, it's abstract, so what? It's about the future of this country. Are we going to continue to be an America that believes in tomorrow and that understands that we have an obligation to leave this country better for our children and our grandchildren and the next generation? Or are we going to buy off political interest groups today? This president must be held accountable, and no American debt intends to do that. You know, I said there are solutions. What is lacking is the political will. But I can tell you again, from my experience in New York, that when the American people put the mind to it and set aside petty differences, we can accomplish anything. On September 11th, I was governor when we were attacked. And it was just horrific. The human loss, the uncertainty, the economic damage, the destruction that was spread across a huge part of that great city. And people wondered, how are you going to get through this? How are you going to come out of it? But I saw New Yorkers and Americans. And at that point, it didn't matter if you were Republican or Democrat, black or white, rich or poor, young or old. We didn't have class warfare or demonization of a part of America. We had unity and an understanding that we had to stand together, solve the problem, and put the tragedy behind us. And we did. And I hope this fall, some of you will be able to go down to Ground Zero. Because what you'll see there is a memorial, a moving memorial that tells the story of the heroism of September 11th. And next to it is rising the Freedom Tower, a building that will rise 1,776 feet tall, the tallest in the history of our country, symbolizing both the fact that we believe in our freedom and that this great country can reach new heights. Let's focus on this issue, not as Republicans or Democrats, but as Americans. Let's get behind no American debt. Hold this president accountable and not let him run from his trillion-dollar-plus deficits. Make sure serious Republican candidates have a plan. And let's do what we have always done as Americans when the crisis hits, because, believe me, we have. Set aside differences, stand together as Americans, and solve the problem. We have to do this, not for me, but for you, for the next generation, for the generation after that. And so that this great country, the greatest country the world has ever known, can look to the future with the optimism and confidence we're entitled to have as Americans. Thank you for being here. Thank you for hopefully helping us with no American debt. And I have no doubt, I came here a few years ago, I'm going to come back in a few more years and talk about how America solved one of its serious problems. Thank you. God bless you. Great to be here.